Morning edition, Israel's assassination of the longtime Hezbollah leader is raising fears of broader war in the Middle East.
There's going to be serious discussions in Tehran about whether to respond, how to respond, and when to respond.
We'll have that and more in about 15 minutes on Morning Edition from NPR and WNYC. A few clouds to start the day at 61 degrees. It'll be mostly cloudy today with a high around 72.
WNYC supporters include Carnegie Hall presenting the Los Angeles Philharmonic conducted by Gustavo Dudamel, featuring pianist Lang Lang, cellist Elisa Weilerstein, singer-songwriter Natalia Lafourcade, and more. October 8th through 10th. Tickets at carnegiehall.org. The following message is from the MTA. Eligible New York City students can now tap for their subway and bus rides with the Student Omni Card for up to 4 taps a day all year long. Details at mta.info.
For 100 years, WNYC has been telling the stories of New Yorkers. Now we're asking you to tell us yours. Join our centennial celebration by sharing your New York story. That time you turned the corner and saw fill in the blank. That life-changing encounter that ended when you got to your subway stop. We'll share select stories on our website, social media, and on the air. Submit yours at wnyc.org/100.
Companies that tell employees whom to vote for.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Progressive. Progressive Commercial Insurance offers personalized rates and customizable coverages for your business vehicles. More at progressivecommercial.com. And by JLL, helping clients unlock real estate possibilities across industries, from data centers to life sciences labs. JLL.com. JLL, see a brighter way.
I'm David Brancaccio. This election season, we're looking at political polarization, specifically the role companies play in intensifying or easing political divides. Today, businesses that lean on their employees to vote for the candidates and policies that are in the company's interest. It is legal, and companies point out labor unions do it too. Alex Hurdle-Fernandez is a professor of international and public affairs at Columbia University and author of the book Politics at Work. Professor, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me on.
I know an engineer in aerospace whose employer would send mass emails to the employees telling them how to vote in a way that would be best for the business, unquote. What does your research show? Was that company an outlier?
What I document in my book, Politics at Work, is that your story is actually part of a larger trend that we've seen over time, with businesses getting increasingly involved in politics in a whole bunch of ways. And one of those has been thinking about their employees as a potential political base to be mobilized, both in terms of pursuing changes in policy at the state level, at the federal level, as well as elections.
Yeah, it may not just be, hey, we think you ought to vote this way, but you decide. It could be, hey, why don't we all help do some political organizing and come together as a group to further a political cause? I mean, in that case, your employer would know who showed up.
In research that I've done, I've found that anywhere from about a quarter to about a third of workers in this country report that they've had some kind of political communication with their employers on the job. And that runs the gamut from, emails from managers, like in your example, telling them about important legislation or political candidates that are up for election. In other cases, it could include rallies that workers are required to attend on company time. And you can see in that kind of broad sweep that there are forms of communication that workers might find more or less comfortable based on that level of pressure that they're feeling.
I mean, how far can they go under law? I mean, they can't tie your voting behavior to a performance review. It's still a secret ballot.
We live in a world of at-will employment for most private sector workers. In that context, I think it's important to think about the imbalance of power between workers and employers and how these messages, in some cases, can be coercive or feel like they're being pressuring towards workers. That said, though coercion is illegal at the federal level, and many states and localities have passed laws that restrict employers' abilities to pressure employees to attend events or to participate in partisan activities. And there's a whole separate set of laws for people who work in the public sector that often have much tighter restrictions as well.
I want to ask you about the famed Supreme Court decision called Citizens United, which allowed unlimited political contributions by corporations. Does that play into this with the ability of companies to give lots of money? Does that contribute to the energy of mobilizing workforces?
So before Citizens United, companies faced a higher bar to using their own corporate resources to get involved in elections. But Citizens United lifted that restriction and made it easier for companies to use corporate resources. And importantly, that counts employee time and activity for electoral ends. And as the Supreme Court made that decision, a number of business organizations began talking to companies about the ways that this unlocked further possibilities for them to communicate with their workers more explicitly on partisan grounds.
I think we both need to acknowledge, though, that there are risks in mobilizing employees, but it's also an opportunity.
There are many cases where we might think that the economic interests of workers are really aligned with their employers. When it comes to the kind of policies that shape a workplace, it really matters in some cases if there's a federal regulation or not, both for the worker and the employer. And so in those kinds of cases, I think it's clear that providing information to workers could be helpful for them to think about their economic conditions and how they connect to politics.
Alexander Hurdle Fernandez teaches international and public affairs at Columbia University. The book is called Politics at Work: How Companies Turn Their Workers into Lobbyists. Professor, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Political polarization at the company level. Our series is called Office Politics and is streamable from marketplace.org. Looking at the screen, stock index futures are all down about 0.1% now.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Baird. Baird strives to attract and retain top financial professionals, providing stability and continuity of advice for clients across market environments. More information at BairdDifference.com. And by Clear Channel Outdoor, an out-of-home billboard company harnessing innovation and technology to connect advertisers with consumers. Billboardsforbusiness.com. And by Bitwarden, a password manager for business designed to help turn end-of-year IT budgets into long-term enterprise security success. Learn more at bitwarden.com.
The National Association for Business Economics is meeting, and members were asked to name the biggest downside risk to the economy. Not the presidential election. Way more, 39% to 23% say the biggest risk is the Federal Reserve getting interest rate policy wrong, which can cause a recession or reignite inflation, depending on the mistake. Bigger than Trump versus Harris. This is the thing keeping economists up at night. Today, Fed Chair Powell speaks to those economists following news inflation went down more than expected in August, which is fine unless you're shopping for a place to live. Here's Marketplace's Kristen Schwab.
Housing inflation is stubborn, says Susan Wachter, a professor of real estate at Wharton, because there's not enough housing.
Demand continues and the supply is constrained.
That has to do with stock and interest rates. They've come down, but not enough for homeowners to sell. Wachter says the average existing rate is around 4%. That keeps home prices high,
pushing people into the rental market because they simply cannot afford to buy a home,
which also pushes up rent. But housing appears a bit stickier in this report than it really is. Ken Kuttner, a former economist at the New York and Chicago Feds, says because the category includes old leases at higher prices,
the rent part of both the CPI and the PC inflation measures tend to lag and come down more slowly than other prices in the index.
He says we might not see falling rents reflected in inflation data until the middle of next year. I'm Kristen Schwab for Marketplace.
And I'm David Brancaccio. You're listening to the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.